So here we're going to be taking a look at the phases of learning as identified by Fitz and Posner in 1967. What they stated was that there are 3 stages to learning movement skills that you move through, and these occur gradually as you get a change in your learning characteristics from each stage. It's important that teachers and coaches have an understanding of each of these phases of learning so that they ensure that learning experiences are structured to ensure success at each level. So if we look at the stages of learning, we'll see first of all we've got the cognitive stage of learning. This is the initial stage. From here you'd move in terms of characteristics towards the associative phase of learning before eventually reaching the final stage of learning, which is the autonomous stage of learning. So if we look at the cognitive stage of learning, which is of course the initial stage. This is our first stage of learning that we all enter. At this stage, it's important that the learner starts to create the mental picture of the skill that they're about to perform. For that to happen, it's important that they get this demonstration from a teacher or coach, and also a verbal explanation alongside the demonstration, so that they can start to pick out the important cues from the demonstration. If the learner gets these important cues in their mind, it's more likely that they're going to be able to get an accurate mental picture of the skill in their mind before they start to copy this skill. Once they've got this mental picture in their mind, they'll then start to practice this skill, and this will occur through trial and error. Now initially there will be lots and lots of errors. Performance will be inconsistent, it'll lack coordination and flow, and as I explained, be full of errors. For these errors to be eradicated at this stage, it's vital that the performer has some form of feedback. Now this will take the place of extrinsic feedback through a coach or teacher, and it's vital also that this coach or teacher reinforces any successes through using positive feedback. This will increase motivation and also confidence, but also inform the performer that they have done something correct, so they will start to learn the skill. But as I said, in this initial phase, mental picture is formed. That's the vital thing. Once they do get the mental picture in their head, they do start to practice through trial and error, but at this stage, performance is inconsistent, lacks extreme coordination and flow, and is full of errors. So the next stage of learning that the learner would get to, once they have the mental picture and have started practicing through trial and error, is the stage of the associative stage. So at this stage, the second stage, it's known as the practice phase. This is where the learner is continuing to practice the skills, beginning to eliminate mistakes, and these mistakes that they do make become fewer and less gross. So mistakes not being so large, and also not so many mistakes. And this is because they have actually learnt the fundamentals of the skill. They've learnt the basic motor programs involved within the skill, and have started to make the subroutines a lot more coordinated, making the whole performance a lot smoother. So they're starting to link the subroutines a lot better, and the performance is a lot smoother rather than the jerky performance that we'd see at the cognitive stage. This increase in flow of the movement is also because the learner is now attending to relevant and specific cues, so their selective attention is correct. They're understanding what to focus on during the performance. They'd also start to develop their kinesthesis, so they start to get a sense of what the skill should feel like to perform, and once they've developed this, they'd be able to correct themselves through their use of intrinsic feedback. However, if practice is ineffective, the learner may have to return to the first stage, which is the cognitive stage, to revisit the mental picture that is required to perform. So they might need to go back to that stage to redefine their mental picture in order for them to get back into the associative phase. So the example for our associative phase would be that the learner has the mental picture in their mind, for example for an overhead clear in badminton. They've got that mental picture, the teacher has given them the information, and they're now focusing on actually getting the shuttle back over the net and high into the backcourt tramlines. They know what aspects they are performing correctly and those which are wrong because they're being told by the teacher, and they try to correct any faulty aspects of that stroke. This would be characteristics of the associative phase. So the final stage of learning, which is achieved through lots and lots of practice, is the autonomous stage of learning. During this stage of learning, the performer performs the skill that has been learned with minimum conscious thought, so they don't need to actually think about performing the skill that they are, which means they can focus their attention on other factors. So if we were looking at a tennis player serving, once the skill could be performed with minimum conscious thought, once the autonomous stage is reached, they could then focus on subtle cues in the opponent's game or tactical elements within the game where they'd served their last couple of serves. Within a team sport, if they've got the skills of passing within the autonomous stage of learning, they can perform them without actually thinking about the pass, so they can think about where their teammates are running or tactical elements within the game. At this stage, the motor programs are well established and they're so well learned they would be stored within the long-term memory. With closed skills, those that are not affected by the environment, such as a high jump or a long jump performance, these performances can become extremely consistent and habitual. So they are performed time after time and can become what we say habitual. At this stage, self-confidence is reached extremely high levels. The performer would feel confident in performing the skills because they're so well learnt, and they'd also be able to detect and correct their own errors. Their kinesthesis will have developed well and will be able to feel when they performed the skill incorrectly, and they'd also be able to correct these errors by themselves because they know what the skill should feel like. At this stage, any further improvements are rather slow because the skills have been so well learnt. However, if there is a lack of practice, the performer may fall back or regress to the second stage, the associative phase. If this does happen, further practice would be needed with positive feedback and feedback being given in order to eliminate the mistakes that occur in order to come back to our autonomous phase. If we look at our example of the overhead clear in badminton, a performer at the autonomous phase would be performing it with little conscious thought. They'd be consistent, they'd be highly confident in playing the skills, which mean they can then focus on the opposition's or the opponent's position on the court and then placing the shuttle correctly where they'd want when performing the overhead clear. So little thought on the actual skill itself, more thought can be given to the tactical elements such as the position of the opponent. So that's the three stages of learning: cognitive, associative and autonomous.